Good evening or good morning. This week we have 4 lectures. We began with the hinge lecture, moving from standard ethical theory into virtue theory. And remember how Elizabeth Anscombe introduced this in her article back in 1958. She says, since modern ethics has got this crazy system of rules with no lawgiver, let's go back to the ancient way of doing ethics. And when she says that, she has in mind the ancient Greek philosophers of Plato and Aristotle and others. So we're going to spend some time on Plato as a moral philosopher. Now, a famous philosopher said the best summary of Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato. Plato is so important, we cannot possibly cover everything about Plato, or even much about Plato, in 2 little lectures. So I'm going to give you a tiny introduction, and I strongly encourage you to find books on Plato. If you are interested in Plato at all, wonderful. Dig into it. Platonic philosophy has shaped our culture more than anything other than the Bible. So let's start with Plato. He lived 424 to 348, that is, notice the numbers are running backwards, so BC. He lives in Athens. He's born to an aristocratic family, one of the upper class in Athens. He is born during the time of the Peloponnesian War, which had already been going on for 7 years when he was born, and it continued throughout his youth up to the time he was about 20 years old. And Athens loses this war. So he's in a society that was a democracy that was in a very long war that it lost. And democracy was under challenge, especially toward the end, and then immediately after the end. That is part of the background to many of the dialogues of Plato. Plato did not become a political leader. He became a philosopher because he was influenced by some person called Socrates. Now, we don't know anything or almost nothing about Socrates except for what Plato wrote. But Plato became a philosopher as Socrates would have him do. Clearly, Socrates influenced him. And in many of Plato's books that are called dialogues, he invented the dialogue form where one character converses with another. In most of these books, the leading character is Socrates. Socrates is having a conversation with somebody. An example of Socrates' method and an example of his interest is a delightful little book called The Laches. In it, Socrates and Laches happen to meet in the marketplace or the agora or someplace there in Athens. And somehow the question comes up, what is courage? Now, this is an appropriate question for these 2 men because Laches is an Athenian. He's retired now, but he's an Athenian general. He's had a long life in the military. Socrates served in the military, but never more than what we would call a private. He had quite a reputation for incredible endurance, being able to, in the cold, in the heat, with food, without food, he had tremendous self-control. But now he's retired from the military. He's not in the military anymore. So they both should know what courage is. And Laches says to Socrates, well, courage is what these young men here are doing. They're practicing fighting in armor. And Socrates says, oh, really? Well, that's a good definition of courage. Except, you know, Laches, I've heard that there's such a thing as women being brave. Well, yeah, women are brave, but women never fight in honor. Oh, that's right. So what is courage if it's not just fighting in armor? Now, might seem to be a silly example, but it illustrates Socrates' method. Engage someone in conversation, start an inquiry into something important, in this case, a virtue, courage. Try out a definition of it. Then criticize the definition by looking at counterexamples. Improve the definition. So Socrates goes around Athens practicing philosophy. He's the son of a midwife. He is not upper class. He is a citizen. He served in the army, but he is definitely not the upper class that Plato was. And yet Plato becomes one of his disciples. He goes around the city engaging in conversation, seeking for the truth. Now, since almost all we know about Socrates is from Plato's dialogues, there is a historical question. Is this the real historical Socrates, or is this really just the mouthpiece for Plato's own theories? And the answer is we don't know for sure. Socrates was Plato's teacher. Plato was Aristotle's teacher. Aristotle never knew Socrates. But Aristotle wrote, his opinion was that in some of the dialogues, we get the real historical Socrates, short, ugly, bow-legged, sarcastic, but he's always pursuing the truth. But in others of the dialogues, when the theory of the forms comes in, then we really get Plato. That's Aristotle's opinion, and he was a lot closer to the situation than we are. No one knows for sure. I've mentioned the theory of the forms. Whether it was Socrates' idea or Plato's idea, this is one of the most influential theories in the history of our civilization. And so always students ask, well, what is a form? And so I have, over the years, used my own example. This is not Plato's example, but it is mine. What is that? Students always say, well, that's a triangle. And so I say, well, wait a second. Think about it. What's the shape of the lines, the sides of a triangle? And the students will say, they're straight. Are those lines straight? Not almost straight. Are they perfectly straight? Also, what's the width of the side of a triangle? Somebody remembering from 5th grade will say, well, they're infinitely thin. Are those lines infinitely thin? They are not. Also, the interior angles of a triangle, how much do they add up to? Again, somebody from junior high memories will surface and you'll say, 180 degrees. 180.1? 179.9? No, precisely, exactly 180 degrees. So now we begin to see, wait a second, this was not a triangle. It was a picture of it. Here, I'll draw another one. A picture of a triangle. And it's not as good as the ones that were in your math book in junior high. But now think about those pictures of triangles in your math books in junior high. Were they perfect? No, you have never seen a perfect, true, real triangle. Notice the word real. This is the theory of the forms. Forms are real. They're eternal. And you know them by your mind. You never see them. You've seen pictures of triangles, but you've never seen true triangles. This is the theory of the forms. So the forms are real, they are eternal, and they're knowable. So we can divide our experience, our thinking, and the reality of things by the divided line. This is an image that comes from Plato's book, The Republic. And Socrates is talking with friends, and he says, we can arrange things on a divided line. So you see the line going across the middle of the screen. On one side is the visible realm that we can see. On the other side is the intellectual realm of reality. The world that we can see is the world of opinions. And things change, whether, the fog comes in and you don't see things very clearly. But the intellectual realm is the realm of true knowledge. We know the forms, real triangles in my illustration. We see pictures. And you can divide it further. Suppose you stand in front of the mirror. We have Socrates standing in front of a mirror. In the mirror, you see a reflection, which is merely an image. We say the real Socrates is the body standing in front of the mirror. But of course, Socrates says to his friends in another book, in the Theo, on the day that he dies, Socrates says, "You can bury me any way you like if you can catch me, because when I die, I won't be here." The real Socrates is not the body that stands in front of the mirror. The real Socrates is the soul that flies away when he dies. This is Platonism as it applies to human beings. Now some of you are thinking, wait a second, I thought that's what the Bible taught. Well, many of us put on our Plato glasses when we read the scriptures. And we need to learn maybe to take them off when we read the scriptures. At the lowest level, we imagine things. When we see them repeatedly, we say, seeing is believing, and so we believe things. When we move up to the forms, we move up to something that we truly know, like mathematical forms, then we have mathematical understanding. But for Plato and for Socrates, at least Socrates in the books, there's something more important than mathematical ideas. And those are the things that he's talking about most of the time. With Laches, what is courage? With someone else, what is truth? In the Symposium, what is beauty? The higher forms, the eternal forms, these are the things that Socrates is after. And so that's how Platonism really moves into ethics, because we search, our souls search for the good, the highest of the forms, the form of the good. We'll talk more about Plato and virtue ethics in our next lecture.